Hey everybody, welcome to episode 296 of the More Than Just Code podcast. My name is Tim Mitchell and I am in Toronto, Ontario. I'm joined once again by Mark Rubin down in San Jose, California.
Hello.
And we have on the line from Seattle, Washington, the one and only Jaime Lopez Jr.
How's it going?
All right. So we'll start off this week with some fact check. We were talking last week about Rode apples, and I remember there was this two machines. It was actually Macintosh 2VX and Macintosh 2V. I've forgotten back in the day they used to call them Macintosh 2s, which meant they were color. They were 68030 processors, and they were on. I checked out the time. I vaguely remember it was like 8 months before they were canceled, but they were on for sale for about a year before they were replaced. And back then they also had a lower end line of computers, which they called Performa, and then later on they were followed up by the Quadra 650 and the Centra. They had the Centra line, which are again they were the same box, but just like they maybe had a slower processor or something like that. The Quadra 650 had that same case that became the 7100, which was Mark's favorite machine.
Yeah,
He loved to hate back then.
The Quadra was the high end one at the time, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, Quadra was wasn't it the LC at the same time as the Quadra?
LC
and SC. There was an SC and an LC, and LC was like Apple denied it was low cost, but it was pretty much like a pizza box computer. It was very thin and small and didn't have a floating point unit.
Yeah, I thought the Quadra was named that because it was a 68040.
04, yeah, exactly. Yeah, but it was replaced quickly. The Quadra 650 was probably the best machine that people had, and then it was replaced by the PowerMac 7100. And I don't know if you remember, like it was sort of like as controversial as going from Swift 2 to Swift 3, or from Objective-C to Swift. Going from the old Motorola processors, the 040s and the 030s, to the PowerPC chip also meant a rewrite of software, right? And there was a lot of pushback from people about switching over to the new PowerMacs, right? Even though they were better in the long run, right?
Yeah, there was all that yellow box stuff. Remember that?
Yellow box.
Or was that later? Wasn't there was red box and blue box and yellow box? And
yeah, I vaguely remember that. I wasn't involved in development at that point in time. I do remember those terms from bounced around.
Yeah, that was when OS 10 was first coming out. So it was all about how the classic Mac OS would run in emulator mode,
right? Yeah.
Inside a container, what we'd call a container today,
right.
For that.
Yeah, there's been a lot of chat, like people talk about. It's funny. I was reading something the other day about somebody was trying to poke Twitter to get a war going between iPad users and Mac users, and I'm thinking, dude, you have no idea. Like it was Microsoft versus Mac. There was Quark versus InDesign. There was PowerPC versus non-PowerPC. There's all kinds of different
divisions in the sand throughout time, especially in just in Apple computing. Never mind Windows, right? So yeah, interesting times.
I'm guessing those must have been youngins, sweet summer child, completely unaware of the wars that have been uselessly waged before you.
Yeah, I have no idea. Like iPad versus Mac, and of course the whole, you just sort of say, does it run Xcode? Okay, next question. That's my.
Those I'm a Mac, I'm a PC ads were pretty good though.
Yeah, that was what somebody pointed out too. Was that period of time too? It was Justin Long versus I've forgotten the other guy's name now. Oh well, yeah, those were hilarious. I used to love those. All right, I mentioned last week that Apple would stop. I was changing my app over to use WK WebView, WebKit views instead of UI WebView. I mentioned that Apple was going to stop. I got warnings when I submitted my apps, and I just sort of randomly said that Apple would stop as of April 30th, 2020. They will no longer accept new submissions. We covered this on the show before, and then any updates to existing apps would have to be done by the end of the year, by December 2020. So there's a correction to that thing that I was talking about.
We have some clairvoyant F you. And I don't know if we used precog or some other term before, so I apologize. Didn't do my research. But what I am aware of is this blog post by Igor Coleman entitled Determining Which Frameworks Use UI WebView. So if you're stuck in this situation, shows you how to do, using the grep command line utility on macOS to find, things that say UI WebView in your code. And if you're using third-party frameworks that you don't have the source code to, he also shows how you can use the nm command to get the symbols table. And
nice. Oh, good to know.
That was pretty cool. So yeah, that's pretty neat. It'll help you out if you're in that situation.
Yeah, I do know of a couple of companies that are in that situation, in fact. Yes, interesting. Yeah, we found out that Teams, Microsoft Teams uses UI WebViews because we had a situation where we could reproduce a defect using loading a file up in Teams. Anyway, that's all I can say about that. Yeah. Anyway, and last bit of or two more pieces of fact check. One was we were talking about vinyl records last week, and Jaime was convinced that Nevermind had never actually been released on vinyl. In fact, it was released on vinyl in 1991, as well as CD and other forms of release. And I checked. I don't have a link here for this, but I thought perhaps What's the Story Morning Glory by Oasis would also be in that same camp. And sure enough, it was also available on vinyl back in the day as well.
Yeah, I was very clearly wrong about that. I guess it wasn't selling like hotcakes because it certainly didn't reach into my consciousness then. The meta point was about I actually think it had started as a Star Trek Discovery sort of side channel of conversation, and about the use of holographic technology that didn't show up in the original series from the 60s. As it turns out, and I've not fact-checked this, but my understanding is that the animated series that came out around the same time with Spock, Kirk, and company from TOS, the original series, apparently the animators there tended to use more holographic technology. So sort of, I guess, in canon. I don't know. It's up to you. But the point was about, future technology and technology lasting, being used and not being used when it could be available and better. And I round myself into the contention that I had that Nevermind from Nirvana didn't show up on vinyl until recent revivals. But apparently I was wrong. Back in for realsies times, they did do that.
So I actually lived through that time period that you just mentioned, which is very favorable to me, and that was that Star Trek the Animated Series was a Saturday morning cartoon, because I think 67, 68 was when Star Trek was canceled, and then about 2 or 3 years later they brought out the animated series to satiate us folks who were looking forward to our Star Trek. But interesting, I was watching a couple of early episodes of Star Trek, and we've talked about this on Spotcast, if we can just have a sidebar for a minute, about Doctor Who. One of the knocks against Doctor Who was back in the day, they used to use a lot of in-camera video effects to have special effects and sort of show things that they would now do with CGI and that kind of stuff and practical effects today. But in the early original series, they used to do a lot of video effects too, to sort of show people, show different situations, and they would flip this we talked about this as well on the Prince of Persia, where they would flip the color gamut around to sort of create effects of spatial storms and vortexes and so on and so forth, all done with in-camera tricks back in the day, back in the heavy sci-fi days. Anyway, moving on. So we heard from our friend Marin Tordov, sometimes host of this show, and he mentioned I mentioned him appearing on Swift Paris, or Swift Paris as it should be pronounced, but he was telling me that it's actually a meetup. It's not actually a conference, and this was they started up, I guess, as a reaction to COVID with an online meetup, and he was appearing on the third week. I think at the time he said they didn't do a fourth week, but yeah. So Swift Paris is actually a meetup, or Swift Paris is a meetup. I'm not going to try and say that in French. Sorry. All right, let's move on to our Ask MTJC.
Yeah, this one is by Way Down the Rabbit Hole at Harmonic Lattice, who asks, would you agree that the trough of disillusionment happened sometime during the transition from Swift 2 to Swift 3, and includes a very handy link to the Wikipedia article on hype cycles?
Oh, is troughs of disillusionment as part of the hype cycle?
Yeah, so you have the technology trigger, and then a very, you use your mind's eye, because this is an audio media. You have a very rapid rise until you get to the peak of inflated expectations. And then on this chart, you go down the roller coaster ride to the trough of disillusionment as people discover that, you know what, there is no such thing as a free lunch or a silver bullet. Pick your particular choice there. Then you have the slope of enlightenment and eventually the plateau of productivity. So looking at the trough of disillusionment for Swift, yeah, I do kind of feel like it kind of happened around that Swift 2 to Swift 3 cycle, right?
Well,
so
that's when we had all the breaking changes. I'm doing air quotes, right?
Yeah, those are the one that like broke people's, wills and sanity as they had come out of the, inflated expectations. Like, oh, we rewrote our entire app in Swift and it has like, 30% fewer defects. And then it's like, cool. Now this year you get to basically rewrite the whole thing again as you have these wildly, unmatching changes of, you can't just run from A to B. You can't just run the migrator. It's like the entire thing is broken. Fix it all at once.
Yeah, sort becomes sorted and sorted becomes sort. Yeah, and all that kind of fun stuff. And arrays are not arrays anymore, and strings are now arrays. And yeah. Mm-hmm.
Strings was nutty. Like it was amazing to me that for like a good year and a half, I had no clue how to get the actual, get the seventh character out of this string. Like, I don't know. Let me go look that up and see what compiles.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this is referencing the hype cycle idea of, my notion of like this happens over like a 10-year cycle. I've seen a couple cycles, the notion of different boosts happening as things change. And at Harmonic Lattice, I definitely think that if I had to choose a time frame, it'd be that Swift 2 to 3 change, because that puts such fear in people's hearts that even today, as the Swift 3 to 4 change wasn't that big a deal. It was almost nothing from 4 to 5, and it's other than additive, it's trivial to move from like 5 to 5.1, 5.2, and others to make sure that your code still works. And even to this day, I still see people on Reddit or Hacker News and other social media channels who are like they don't live and breathe it, like people who listen to the show. And they're like, oh my gosh, like is Swift still changing every day? It's like, well, no, it hasn't for a while, but I understand why you feel that way and why you're scared, because it did go through that terrible transition.
Yeah, 1 to 2 was horrible and 2 to 3 was horrible. I guess by the time I got to 3 to 4, it was kind of okay.
Yeah, no, 2 to 3 was really horrible. But yeah. One went to 1.5 and then 2. They were relatively good, but
no. Well, 1 to 2 is terrible because they changed just things like in Swift 1 you had NS errors flying around, and then in Swift 2 it was like all that's gone, so the signatures are gone. Try catch didn't work like try catch in other languages, and it was like, what's going on? I remember one particularly painful and embarrassing day when I was trying to quickly write a quick little app in Swift, when I was with a group people were working on the back end, and I was trying to do an app for it, and I couldn't get anything to work because I tried to use it in Swift 2, kind of not realizing that 1 to 2 had just kind of happened, and I wasn't paying attention. It was a very bad day. Very bad day.
Yes, sir, Bob.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we had an email reply, actually, I guess a comment on our posting here from a gentleman named Joost, or spelled Joost, but pronounced Joost, he says. He's talking about how he said our discussion about the Xcode iPad on the Xcode, or Xcode on the iPad. He said commenting to me that I'd remarked that it would be a derivative of Xcode, not quite fully functional. But his point is that he says, however, coding itself should think of going away. I know the software industry has been saying this for years, but we've had a variety of tools that do kind of coding by drag and drop, nothing great. At some point, we need to get serious about doing away with all this custom work, and which coding really is, and be busy about more general top-level coding with some machine filling in the details. If we could code more on simple devices, the coding in its entirety would be better, more more simple to do without delivering simplistic applications, though. Just his 2 cents. What do you think about that? About getting rid of the coding part of development? I think we've talked about that before.
Well, it kind of depends on what coding becomes. A lot of people do coding by just taking this off-the-shelf library and this off-the-shelf library and gluing them together and just building something. And it works for some things, for simple stuff. But whenever you get into anything more complicated, it's still really custom. It's hard to see how that kind of stuff could be done with drag and drop of off-the-shelf components to me. But who knows?
Well, there's a lot of boilerplate, I suppose, in the sense of like way tables are made, and I think SwiftUI and Combine are kind of simplifying that a lot too, right? So, but yeah, like if you need to write an audio driver, or you need to get into like the nitty gritties and down to the bit level of something, it's a little difficult to do with drag and drop kind of coding. I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, it's hard. Like I've seen all kinds of apps and behind the scenes, and digging into the code, and some things would be really nice to be able to do. Like I do see like a lot of repetitiveness, but I think I'll talk about this a little bit later in the show. But when you're doing a table view or a collection, like a list in SwiftUI, and you're bringing Combine in, you don't have to deal with a delegate and the data source and all that kind of stuff, and what happens in a cell and that kind of stuff. You can using like Swift and Combine are getting rid of a lot of that boilerplate coding that we have to do, right? So
yeah, for UI stuff, sure, yeah,
but like when you get down to the machine level, it's a little different. You still need to have some coding chops, I think, right?
Yeah.
I think if I was to make a very stretched analogy, I'm going to think of it as being similar to, imagine you are building physical buildings, and on the one hand you have something like a nice starter home, whatever that means in your area. It looks fairly similar to others that are in its developed land plot block area, and then on the other end of the spectrum you have the Sydney Opera House. And I think for a very long time we've treated software development too much like everything needs to be the Sydney Opera House, when really you could connect the off-the-shelf stuff together. Maybe, customize a little bit. It's got different colors, and maybe this one has bay windows and this one doesn't, but largely the same, gets the job done. And I think that's how I interpret that question about, moving more of development to, hey, using stuff off the shelf, using, different standard stuff, and then really doing the super custom stuff like the Sydney Opera House that had to develop a whole new way to lay concrete, I think, to get the little like shell arch thing. You don't need that for your starter home, right? But it's certainly appropriate to go fully custom for, this one-off large revenue project.
Will we ever get to the point where we have like a Lego style coding? Like, I guess we kind of sort of do now, but like where we just have building blocks and we just slap them together, right? Using your concrete building analogy, like I was looking at a video on Habitat, which was the building they built for Expo 67 for the housing. And it was all done with concrete blocks of various sizes, and they just kind of screw them together and stacked them on top of each other and made various different kinds of apartments out of it, right? So, you build the pieces and you put them together, as opposed to having to write that piece or rewrite how concrete is made, like you said, right? That's kind of the analogy of the heavy machine coding that Mark and I were just talking about.
Yeah, and I think this comes out of the Xcode on iPad speculation, but if I were to guess, Xcode on iPad, certainly on day one and maybe forever, will probably be towards creating the starter home type of stuff. And if you truly needed the Sydney Opera House version of an app, all right, cool. Well, you're going to need a MacBook for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I made this prediction last week and I stand by it. I think it's just going to be a souped up playground with some file management.
Right, yeah, possibly.
Yeah. Some organization of files, better than what playgrounds have right now. Yeah.
Okay, and this next piece is not really technically an Ask MTJC, but yeah, I was playing around with I mentioned last week that I've got this iPad here and I should be able to plug a USB drive into it. So I've got this, it's actually I think it's part of the camera connection kit that I've got. It's a Lightning to USB. It's just like a single, USB-A kind of connector. So I plugged a thumb drive into my iPad and I got this immediate, Ultra USB 3.0. This accessory requires too much power. Cannot use accessory error. And so I posted on Twitter asking if anybody else has given this a shot. And Rasmus Sten, who's somebody I met on the way to WWDC, I think 2011. It's what I was talking about, meeting people from around the world. I think he's somewhere Netherlands, I think. Anyway, he pointed out that he's using he's got like an HDMI USB connector, but it's got a pass-through power. I guess he must be using a Lightning connector here, but this is an iPad Pro he's got here. Same vintage as mine. So he was saying that in order to plug in his USB, in this case SSD drive, he has to supply power to the adapter to be able to handle that. So, or power to the drive itself to be able to drive the thing. Like you can plug a USB drive into a Mac and it'll take power from the USB port, but I guess the USB or Lightning connector doesn't have any way of supplying power to do things. But I think the new USB based iPad Pros probably do have a little bit of power that we can supply to devices. So more follow up for next week, I guess. But just a little bit of information on that trick there. Whether or not I could plug in I'll have to get a different adapter, I guess, to try this scenario out. I was trying to see, to answer Mark's question last week about whether I could actually read files off a USB onto my iPad. There you go.
Yeah, it looks like Rasmus Stedden is from Helsinki in Finland.
Thank you. Yeah.
Right. And I'm shocked, given our Star Trek discussion, you didn't do like a Scotty impression. Well, I've given her all you got. Or even given you all she's got, Captain. I cannot change the laws of physics.
I
don't even know if that's an actual quote, but it's a pastiche of quotes of Scotty stuff that I can think of.
The truth is that James Doohan is actually Canadian. So there you go. There's your bubble burst. All right. So let's move on to a follow-up. So for the first thing I've got here, and we've talked about this on the show many times before, but Mark Gurman on Bloomberg was being interviewed, and he's put together, there's a little video interview with him and a lady on the show talking about how, of course, my Bloomberg has expired now, but yeah, basically saying that Apple is moving towards its own chips starting in 2021 is the prediction, that they will start using these inside Macintoshes as well as they do now for the ARM-based chips that they use in the iPads and iPhones and things like that. So predictions that maybe like the next iPad Air will have some kind of Apple-based chip or Apple-designed chip, or design and manufactured, I guess. And this is, and of course, the question came up: what does that mean for Intel? I think Intel stock did take a bit of a dip. I don't know if it's necessarily based on this news, but I think if Apple's moving away from, we're talking about moving away from using Intel chips directly, that's not going to help Intel's stock very much. What do you guys think about that? What do you think about it, Mark, specifically?
I think it's cool. I think this has been coming for a while now. Apple's chips have been getting more and more sophisticated over time. So it'll be interesting to see whether it's still an ARM-based architecture, which it probably will be, because how much, there's not that much difference these days between like a MacBook Air and an iPad Pro, right? So they probably could put an ARM chip in there. I can't see them using one of these chips in the next generation of the fancy $20,000 Mac Pro, but that's a whole different world. But for sure, for the low end ones, for the small laptops, makes complete sense. As far as Intel is concerned, it'll hurt them a little bit, but I wouldn't be so worried about Intel going out of business. They do plenty of other stuff other than make chips for Apple.
It's true. Yeah. The other thing I was thinking about too about the iPad Pro or iPad line, with when we start talking about things like Final Cut and Xcode coming to it, is obviously the fact that they can now have larger capacity devices makes for, because you're going to need disk space or storage space for these kind of efforts as well, right? As we move in towards the heavier programming on iPad, right?
But they've already been using, for some time now, they've been using their own chips in the iPad.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
This is for the Mac.
Yeah. No, I know. But I was talking about I was thinking about the fact that they have the space capacity on iPads as well. Like that was one of the things I was thinking about earlier this week was that's one of the challenges going to be, or potential challenge. Like one of the problems we have on Macs is if you buy a Mac with too small an SSD drive, you really can't get serious about development. And Xcode takes a lot of space, and Final Cut takes up a lot of space when you're building and rendering files, right? Because there's the other rumor about that what came out last week with the Xcode to iPad is also that Final Cut's coming to iPad, and it does take a lot of disk space up for those kind of things. All right, Jaime, what do you got for us?
This is rather minor in terms of things, but I think it was going to lead me into a public service announcement for folks. So the actual story is that the Apple Support app has been revamped and includes dark mode. And I was going to ask the panel and people in general, like, have you gotten your apps up to date for dark mode? It became available in iOS 13, and some apps have had a dark mode equivalent prior to official dark mode APIs being available, but kind of curious how folks are doing.
Well, as you know, I started working on, and I finished basically. I just haven't published it yet. Device Tracker has been set up for dark mode. Ironically, two of my other apps that I worked on already were dark mode because they were black themed. But I guess I could look at the other apps that I've got out there, see whether or not it'll be. But I'm staring right now at my Google Safari browser running Google Doc, and I notice it's a bright white screen, and I'm being blinded by it. So I mentioned that last week too.
Mm-hmm.
So what about you, Mark?
Well, most of my apps were pretty custom graphic design, so it doesn't make sense to make them dark mode because they all had their own color schemes. So I would say no.
Right. How about you, Jaime?
Yeah, that's definitely the thing that has come up, and on a personal level, I tend to use dark mode. And I'm trying to think if there's anything I turn off dark mode for.
Like 24/7 your dark mode?
Yeah, iPhone, iPad. My Macs, both work and personal. Like everything is in dark mode. I have been frustrated for, I don't know if it's weeks or months. I don't know. Time is a new thing nowadays. I use the Gmail app for iOS, and I've seen that other people have it, and they've had it, and it's been rolling out for however long time has been going on. And so I'm going to take a stab in the dark here and say, if you are a Google engineer who has access to do this, hit me up and find a way to flip it on for me. Because it feels like I'm in some sort of sick, twisted A/B test to see, will this dark mode lover go insane if we don't give them dark mode?
Which app is this? Are you talking about?
The Gmail app for iOS.
The actual Gmail as opposed to Inbox?
Right. And it's funny because a lot of other apps like Google Photos and maybe Maps and others have flipped on dark mode for me, but Gmail was one of the first to hypothetically have availability, and for me specifically, it has not, even though I've seen evidence on the interwebs that it is a dark mode made for everybody else.
It's interesting. I'm just getting a spinner on the Gmail app.
So I've also updated my websites too, because some of my I guess a large portion of my websites are WordPress, and it's very simple to go in and create a dark mode theme for that, because I did that earlier on in a lot of the apps a lot of the websites I should say that I build, support, whatever. It actually takes probably like half an hour to set up some themes or some styles for dark mode. But I just, from a day-to-day point of view, I run the mode where your dark mode switches on at sunset. So during the day, I'm working, in the old default style with the white screens, and around depending on when the sun goes down, my Macs and my iPads and iOSs all switch over to dark mode.
Yeah, I have mine on all the time. And you were talking about websites. I will give immense kudos to the fine folks at Stripe. So if you go to stripe.com/docs/API,
right,
you'll notice that they have a little switch that lets you go from dark mode to daylight mode.
Really?
And it apparently figured out that I'm in dark mode because I didn't even know there was a switch until I started looking more closely and said, oh, this must be a white background for everybody else.
Yeah, Twitter did that originally. They had an all or nothing. They had dark mode. I think at one point they shipped with dark mode, and I was taken aback because I hadn't quite got used to dark mode yet. But now they have it honor the system setting. Whatever your system setting is, it'll do that. So during the day it's light, and during the night it's dark. So just easier to read it at night with the dark mode. But it's taken me a while to get used to Xcode and things like that in dark mode because the colors all change, right? So it fuses my little brain. Alrighty. This X piece here just came out today. I just heard about this, and I don't know if you guys have heard it yet, but Apple confirms yet another problem with their notification apps. I thought there's a specific talking about messaging, but it affects everything. There is a series of characters you can send from, if you're running 13.4.1 on iOS, there's a certain set of characters in a language called Sinji, I think, or Sindhi, that can crash people's computers or crash their phones. There's a video here from Everything Apple Pro that shows an example of it. And Apple is currently, as we speak, rushing out an emergency patch for iOS 13 4.2, and I believe there's a Mac fix Macs coming too, because I had heard something about it being a problem on Apple on Macs as well. But I think I'm just reading here that it's just iOS. So yeah, potential flaw in the Mac iOS Mail app, but it also affects other apps like Messages and things like that as well. I don't know if you guys have heard that at all.
Well, let's put this in perspective. This is an article written by Gordon Kelly.
Okay.
So you shouldn't take it very seriously.
Okay.
Everything he writes is, oh, Apple just screwed up and everything this is horrible. This is terrible. I mean, he does this every time.
Does he?
And yeah. And so the Mail one has been known for a while, and Apple has pretty much confirmed that it's not really an issue. Although, yeah, it's theoretically possible that you could take this exploit and mix it with a couple of other exploits and maybe cause a problem, but there's no evidence that anyone's done this and there's going to be a fix for it. All the same old stuff. It's bugs happen. The other one, okay, yeah, if you happen to type this crazy sequence of characters with in a different language and with flags of Italy or whatever, yeah, for some reason it crashes the app or crashes the phone. You have to restart, which sucks. Yeah, and people,
But we're just crashing people's phones. We're not trashing the phone or making it unusable.
It's not trashing the phone. No, just crashing it.
Right.
So yeah, these aren't great, but to give it the level of emergency that this article seems to is meh.
All right, good to know.
Sorry,
that's okay. I'm just reporting on the event. So, but it's good to know. Yep. I was asked to confirm if this was true or not, but now I know. I have to look for this Gordon Kelly guy. And
oh yeah, you've never noticed him before. Yeah, his articles are always like this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, clearly, isn't Forbes a sort of money market kind of magazine? Isn't that their sort of raison d'etre? Like,
yeah, they're a financial.
Yeah. So you scare some stock people to dump their stocks and profit, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Could be. All right.
Yeah, I think the nuance here is that these are factually true bugs. It is the presentation of how severe is the situation.
Right.
That is Mark's contention here, right?
Exactly.
And I agree with it too. That, it sucks. I mean, I looked up. There's like 40-some million people in the Sindh region of Pakistan. So that's rather unfortunate. I don't know what the sequence of character is. Please don't send them to me because I don't want my phone crashing.
Right.
Real-time follow-up. Here we go.
Yeah, at least it sounds like that's all it is, right? It's just a crash and not like it roots your system or bricks your phone or something.
Right.
It's an unfortunate series of events. All right. So my nephew in England sent me this particular story earlier today, and I saw somebody ask, I think our Dave Werner guy asked about this particular one, why the NHS would make this decision. But Mark, tell us what's going on with the National Health Service in the UK.
Well, we talked. I think it was last week about how Apple and Google had worked together to come up with a plan for doing contact tracing or contact tracking that was actually pretty clever and really had privacy first. And it was a decentralized system where everyone's phones would kind of keep track of in an anonymized way, what other phones they had come near, and if someone had found out that they were diagnosed with the virus, they could post to a certain place saying they had it, and people could check in and see if they had come in contact with that. So it's kind of a good, anonymous, privacy, secure way of doing this. Interestingly, the British National Health System has decided not to use that plan. It's not so terrible though, and they've got their own plan where they're using phones tracking just Bluetooth connections or Bluetooth connectivity nearby, and sending it up to a centralized server. So they're keeping track of it all in one place and sending out push notifications when people have reason to believe that they've been in contact with someone. So there's trade-offs. So it seems like there's a little bit more risk for privacy violations with this system, and it's certainly going to be a little bit more worse for your performance, because I believe the app has to wake up the phone every time you come near someone, wake up the app rather, and to make this network call and all that to report in. And having everything on a centralized server, seems like it could be problematic, but they're claiming that it's not, and they're claiming that they found ways around the performance issues. And in fact, Apple in this article said says that they're perfectly fine with that system. They just think their own system is better. So, maybe this isn't really that big news, but it is just kind of interesting that not everyone is quite on board with the system that Apple and Google are using.
There was a couple of comments made about that in that tweet I was talking about earlier, that people were guessing that perhaps the National Health Service maybe they're getting into markets faster, because I think Apple didn't come out with apps specifically. They came out with a framework, right? And I don't know if it's rolled out yet. It's not rolling out till May. Maybe that's not enough time for the NHS. Maybe they want to get on this quicker. I mean, the UK is on track, I think, to be the biggest the severest hit place, kind of like New York is in the U.S. It seems to be like, of all the European countries, I heard today that they have the most severe cases and deaths and things like that, right? So maybe they feel they need to get on it quicker, right? Than Apple's and Google are providing, right? Possibly.
Or they've already spent a bunch of money on it, not knowing that Apple is going to come up with one, and it's sunk cost, so they might as well use it.
Well, we all know that this stuff doesn't happen overnight, right? Like you don't come up with this kind of thing and then it hits the news and you worked on it yesterday. No, this has been going on for a couple of weeks, I'm sure, right? And they probably had committees and decisions and UX people designing this thing and technology people coming up with the way of waking up the device to do this kind of stuff, right? Yeah, interesting.
Mm-hmm. For completeness, I'll note that I think France had requested that Apple and Google basically undo what was done for Bluetooth and the way it works with not running in the background all the time, because they have their own particular app that they, I guess, have already developed or gotten very close, and they want to have Apple and Google change things. And unsurprisingly, both platform providers said, no, you use our COVID-19 exposure notification tool that we're coming out with. And for more completeness, Germany, I believe, has said, yep, this is good. We're going to use what Apple and Google are.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago when we talked about this, that I had read somewhere that there was some issue. I think, because Apple wouldn't let third-party apps run any other way than how they provided for everybody. I think that's with Bluetooth running, behind the scenes, right? And not being able to jump into the, not giving us, like Apple has in particular, I don't know about Google, but Apple has their own sort of rules for doing that kind of stuff. But for the rest of us, we have to sort of comply with their wishes. And obviously, like I always say, they're protecting us from ourselves, right? In a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
So Jaime, I'll let you introduce this next controversial titled article.
Yeah, to keep our, what I assume is a PG rating, I don't recall, I'm going to retitle it as How Not to Write Crappy Code, Intentional Conditions by... actually don't know this individual's name. I didn't see. It's Steve, it says at the top, just merely Steve. And no last name, but tewa.net is what we'll have in the show notes for those of you driving at home. And he breaks down a function that honestly looks pretty similar to some code that I've inherited, in the past. Mm-hmm. And it starts out kind of complicated. I'm going to do my best to describe in words what I can see here. So imagine you had a function that needs to save a person record, and you might have some business rules around you need to make sure that something has actually changed in this record before it gets saved. You need to make sure that the record is not built in, some sort of artifice that it already exists and should not be changed. And you also need to make sure that the user actually has permission to change the record. So the horrifying if statement that I see, let's see if I can even do it properly, is if you don't have the record being as built in, and in parenthesis, as this big set of or statements, if the record's first name equals the old record's first name, or the record, if not the record's first name, and if not the record's last name equals old record.last name, or you don't have the record company equaling the old record's company, and then that, or I missed one, or record department not equaling the old record department, and all of that was in parentheses, ended with user can actually change the record. And if you end up in that sad situation, you can't save. Otherwise, you can. And he breaks down different pieces that I think are... This looks like a lot like the kind of advice I would give folks in code reviews and in pull requests, right? I'm like, help me out. I don't really understand what's happening here. Could you break it out into functions that are well scoped and well named so I can understand what's happening? So he's like, all right, well, what if we break out can you actually save this thing? into a function? And what if we break out, what's happening with this and that? And so by the tail end, and I think it's a good read, this can save function that takes in a record and the old record, checks to see, is the record, is it built in, right? So you turn that into a function. Can the user actually change this record, right? Like, do they have permission to do so? And another function says, like, are these values equal? Like, is it just silly to even try to change and save with something that's not changed? And if you get through all of those, which to me, I'd probably change these to guard statements myself, then you actually can save. And that makes me a whole lot happier because it's easier to understand as you're reading through code and you're trying to, let's say, fix a bug. You're like, okay, it's not working under this scenario. What is happening? I probably have a good idea where it's having problems, right? Like if we made a mistake on checking whether the record is a built-in type or not, all right, well, I can check for that and drill into there. It also makes debugging a whole lot easier. One of the intermediate steps he does is to separate out, hey, what if you had a variable that takes the value of some of these Boolean comparisons you're making, and then we could see what that is, right? Instead of having to do debugger magic or check each, individual little parameter there, you can say, yeah, well, this is false and it should be true. So obviously it's the problems here in this area.
Right.
Thoughts, comments as you looked at the various bits of code and how it modified from the rather unwieldy sets of if statements and parentheses.
Makes sense. I'm a big fan of making your code readable, even if it takes a few more characters. People sometimes forget that compilers are very good at taking out all the extra stuff you've put in and optimizing. And if you can make it easier to read by putting in, like I'm a big fan of, if I'm going to return, say I have a function that has to, let's say it has to initialize, it creates a new instance of something and returns it, let's say. So a lot of people will just have return and then the init method, you know what I mean? The instantiation thing. So return my object parentheses with args and just return it.
Right.
Well, what's wrong with having a let my object equals this thing and then return that? The advantage of that is you can always stick a breakpoint in there and probe things and do interesting things. It's very readable. Whereas if you just return it directly, right, it's not always so easy to debug or troubleshoot that kind of thing. It doesn't take much extra code and the compiler gets rid of it. So why not just do it? I think it's cleaner.
Yeah, I do something similar with, that final variable being, results, final outcome, whatever makes sense in the context of what I'm writing.
Yeah.
And then the return of that very thing. So I can even see, is that thing there? And I don't have to do debugger magic or, let me go modify the code or run particular expressions in a debugger. It's like, well, I can just see what it is, right? Because it shows there in the captured watch state.
Yep.
Yeah, a lot of times people are just trying to be clever. I don't know if nobody ever sees your code, why bother being clever? Or if you need to share it with somebody else, why bother being clever? Try and be a little bit more explanatory about it. Self-documenting code is our friend.
Yeah. And I think the whole idea here is, despite the very amusing title, right, about how not to write crappy code, the happier part is the subtitle, right? That is intentional conditions. So,
right,
what is it you're intending to do? So does the user have permissions? It's like, well, how are you checking that? Sometimes it comes from this weirdo, complicated structure, and I've lived in that world before. Believe me, where it's like, all right, how do we determine if this is a buyer or a seller? How do we determine if this is a driver or a passenger? How do we determine if this is a merchant or a shipper, right? Like it almost always starts out nice and clean, and then business reason to happen, and you're like, oh my gosh, this thing we thought was never ever going to change was in an invariant condition. There will never ever be a merchant who is also a shipper or a buyer who is also a seller. Oops, well, it turns out, product manager decided, yes, this is a good business opportunity. And now you've got this nuttiness, and I get it. And I've seen some of these rather tortured if-else statements like, well, okay, so if this is a driver, but they're also not a passenger, but if this is a shipper and maybe is a merchant, but maybe they could also be a buyer, it just blows my mind trying to figure out how can you make this if-else statement even more complicated when you can shove the dust bunnies into, all right, is this person actually valid to make make this sort of command happen. And then you can, you might still have to deal with the nuttiness inside of that function, but at least we can look through the business logic and say, all right, what happens if this other scenario happens? Okay, well, then it would have gone over here. And we can understand and have stuff that isn't, oh no, it turns out that if the user was signed in as this, but then signed out and signed back in as something else, we lose, control of what's happening. And I've seen tons of bugs like that. If you're trying to gate off of very, very shaky foundations of could this person read in a code review and understand this rather nutty bananas type of if-else statement or switch statement or other.
Yeah, stack conditionals are always hard to sort of read the logic through, right? But it's kind of like you mentioned guard. I always think of guard as, are we there yet? No? Okay, let's get out of here, right? Guard is kind of an interesting convention to use in that sense, right?
Yeah, and that would be, and I've said this on the show before, I'm an irrational fan of the guard statement in Swift. So I think I would change some of this final function to be, guarding against that this is not a built-in record, guarding against that we actually can change the record, guarding against, that I might actually move this to the front. Is this record the same as the old record? It doesn't really matter if it's a built-in record or you have permissions on it. If it hasn't changed, you're not going to change it, right? At the very least, even though some of that is stylistic and maybe becomes business logic quibbles, at the very least I can see it because it's intentional now, and we can have discussions and meaningful discussions and maybe even debates about what should happen first. Should this be an if statement or guard statement? Whereas with the other thing, it's pretty easy to look at that on a Friday afternoon and say, looks good to me, +1. Go merge that sucker, we'll figure it out on Monday. Right.
Move fast and break things, huh?
It's QA's problem now.
Yeah.
Right. So that comes back to you to fix it. All right. What's next here?
Next one is apparently the latest iOS beta makes it easier to unlock an iPhone with Face ID when you're wearing a face mask.
Nice.
So it's not exactly like it sounds. It's not like it reduces security in terms of, being better, smarter at recognizing your face and, with half of your face covered with a mask during this pandemic. It sounds like it is UI nicety so that you aren't stuck waiting for Face ID to decide that you don't have the appropriate face and then giving you the passphrase, passcode, long and piece. It looks like it sort of shortcuts it and figures out, as I understand it, that you're wearing a mask and says, all right, no point running the full Face ID check here. Let's just shortcut this and immediately give them with the passphrase, passcode prompt.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Because that's a problem I have is I've been wearing a mask like for the last month or and a half when I go out to walk the dog, and I have an August lock on my door, and so as soon as I step out of the door, if my phone's locked itself, like in the 2 seconds it took me to get out the door, it's super frustrating to look down at the thing and wait for it to realize that I'm wearing a mask. Yeah, so I guess it's not recognizing that I've got the me with a mask on. It's recognizing that I'm wearing a mask and it can't identify me. You can't find my nose, for instance, right? So it's just going to go right to the lock screen. Cool, or to the passcode. Yeah, nice.
Yeah, I'm kind of hoping that they'll add some sort of thing. Where,
they need to scan our retinas. Come on, it's like 2020 already, right?
Yeah. Well, at the very least, we've got the ability to unlock our MacBooks with our Apple Watch.
Yeah.
So I can unlock my Apple Watch using my phone. What if I were to, while I'm wearing my watch, unlock my phone?
By the same token, though, with my watch, when I'm walking up to the house and I say, hey, followed by the word Siri, and I say unlock the door, it'll tell me I need to unlock my phone before it'll let me do that right off the watch, right? Which is kind of frustrating, but things that these are first world problems, Jaime, but yeah.
Indeed.
But actually, I discovered too that the August Lock actually has an Apple Watch app, and I can just tap on the little green icon to open my to unlock my door, so without having to talk to Siri. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, this wearing a mask thing, I don't see it going away anytime soon. I don't know about you guys, but here in the Great White North, Carol and I have been making masks for people free. If anybody wants a mask, let us know. We're right now. Carol's like people are saying, oh, you could make all kinds of money selling masks. Her point is it's saving people's lives, so they're free. If you want a mask, hit us up. We'll get you a mask. But anyway, or
do we have MTJC masks?
We do. Where have you been, man? We've had them for weeks.
I was trying to tactfully find a way to ask Tim.
Oh, really?
Since I saw that he has some, but I was like, man, why is he holding out on the rest of us? Exactly. But that's okay. We'll just it's part of the show now. It's part of the show.
They're actually inkjet iron-on transfers. So to be honest honest with you, they're a little hard to breathe through. You can still, I mean, they're not completely airtight, but they do sort of like shellac the fabric. So I'm thinking, if we're going to make them, Carol and I are ex-screen printers from way back when. We'll actually make a set of screens. If people are interested, we'll happily make some MTJC fabric, and Carol will whip you up masks. Just let us know. We'll definitely do it for sure.
I'm definitely used to breathing through that sort of thing because some of my makeshift ones, let me tell you, well, I guess they're dirty, so I need to wash these. But if I had it handy, I would more accurately describe the red bandanas that are from the, I believe, 2009 Bumbershoot Festival here in the Seattle area and sponsored by Toyota, if I'm not mistaken. So there is all sorts of red, I assume, screen printed text all over it. And, it's not ideal, but I breathe through it just fine.
So here's the PSA. So these are not medical masks. Like, they're not meant to be worn by, personal, like by people in hospital situations, but they are meant to protect other people from you breathing on them. Right? And spewing suppose you get infected for whatever reason, right? It's meant to keep the germs away from you. But when you get back into the house, you have to immediately take it off and put it into the wash, because you shouldn't be wearing a mask more than once. So I have multiple masks, and Mac and I every day take a fresh one out every morning, and as soon as I'm done with the walk, I take them off without touching the mask and take a new one the next day. So like, if you ask me for a mask, you'll get two. Like, basically that's kind of the way we're doing it, Carol and myself. We've made them for family and friends, and people are asking us for customized ones now. Carol's working on some Canada flag ones. We've done some Blue Jay ones. We've done like all the, and this is, for her, like this is all scrap fabric. She's, Jonathan on Spotcast has been, she's been making him pajamas and boxer shorts for years. So she's got all the Marvel and Star Wars and Star Trek and all that kind of stuff. So we've been making branded masks for people. But yeah, if we have to do any kind of customization, it'll do a different story. We actually did, a friend of mine asked us to build her some bridal masks using wedding fabric, which Carol has as well, right? So lots of fun, kind of, I think that definitely wearing masks is going to be something that's going to be the new normal for people in North America, much like it is in Asia, over there, they don't think twice about it ever since SARS, the first SARS. So yeah, definitely, but that's the PSA. Yeah. Don't expect that you wear these masks, once or many times, I should say. You basically need to wash them. They just go in the wash like a t-shirt, or they're basically like t-shirt fabric kind of thing. Actually a little thicker than t-shirt fabric, but yeah, just make sure you wash them between wearing.
That's what I've got. We've got a stack of bandanas, and I think these are dish towels normally. Cool. And a little quarantine box to put them in there and then wash them, do all sorts of stuff there. And you're totally right. Whatever protection it might give to you, the wearer, is like in the movies when the guy gets shot and it turns out the big wad of cash he happened to keep near his heart stopped the bullet. Like, it's that level of like, all right, if you get really lucky, sure. But otherwise, it is done more as preventative from spreading in case I happen to be infected and happen to be asymptomatic and I just don't even know and haven't isolated myself yet. So yeah, just doing my part. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and it's, I get that, the economy's suffering and stuff like that, but you know what, this is the new normal. And, until we have a vaccine, there really can't be pussyfooting around this situation, right? Soapbox off. Oh, wait, we have something else.
Yes. If you thought we were done talking about pandemic stuff, this is actually more technical bend here in that the aforementioned, let's call it exposure notification API, because Apple and Google have changed from contact tracing, which isn't actually quite accurate with how it works. It's really about letting people know and therefore notify them if they might have been exposed. So the exposure notification API is apparently available in the Xcode 11.5 beta for you to start incorporating that API into apps. And the iOS 13.5, is that right? iOS 13.5 beta apparently includes the code to run said framework. Not tried this out myself, but it is out there as of this recording, and so folks can try that out and see how things work.
Nice.
It's pretty nifty. And the aforementioned, government agencies and medical boards and bodies presumably will start digging into this and hopefully get things out there rather soon.
So wait, you said we can play with this now?
That's my understanding. Like, I'm going to assume that you would still need to pass through the Google Play and App Store review policies to actually get a For Realsy app out there for distribution. I don't have a lot of detail that I haven't seen if the app review guidelines guidelines have changed at all. But according to this article, you'll be able to try it out with the betas.
Well, I think that Matt Triple T Thompson, when we talked about this 2 weeks ago, I think he must have gotten hold of said framework, or at least the headers, because he was surmising how it worked by looking at the headers, right? So cool. And just I love these articles that we find in the posts when we get on here, because real time follow up. There's a sidebar here article that says you can get Affinity Photo for 50% off right now. So if you're looking for something to do and you're bored and you want to play around with some artist material kind of stuff, or Photoshop-y kind of things, Affinity Photo, the fine people at Serif have made this available at 50% off at the present time. This is in the Verge article that we're going to have a link in the show notes to. So run out there and get your masks and play some Affinity Photo time. All right, so let's get to our picks here. Shall I go first, Jaime? I've got a couple.
Sure.
All right. So both of these came to me from Scott Gardner, friend of the show and former Ray Wonderlic Wendy, and he's also been an instructor at LinkedIn. He was commenting on the Combine framework, Combine documentation that Apple has put out, and he just noted, for those of us who haven't been paying attention, that the fine folks at Apple have been updating this documentation as it's been going, and so he's posted a link here, which I've picked up, talking about how the Combine framework, the people at Apple are doing a bang-up job of writing good docs and updating them, and having some good examples here on everything you want to know about Combine, what we're afraid to ask. So yeah, check it out. It's quite, I think we've talked about other Apple documentation. It kind of seems a little thin sometimes. This one is quite extensive in terms of its coverage of Combine and its use with SwiftUI and other things. And this applies to, iOS and macOS and Catalyst, tvOS and watchOS, of course. And let me just see, does it switch? No, this is just written in Swift. Oh, dough. And actually, they do have that switch there to show what's changing between the different versions of Xcode. So they've got I guess it's just part of the new documentation altogether. I don't see any changes here myself, but you can switch over to see what's changed between various versions. But this is just talking about Xcode 11 to 11.5 beta 1, and there's not been changes.
Does Combine even work in Objective-C? I've never even thought about that.
I don't think it does. No, they said that. Well, I'm sure. Well, I do remember I went to a talk at WWDC where it was a really long talk, and they talked about Combine in general, and then they talked about Combine working with, when you want to roll your own kind of thing. And then they showed the third part of the talk was how Combine works with SwiftUI, and it was like, well, hands down, that's the easiest way to deal with Combine, because of all the built-in conventions that are within SwiftUI. But yeah, you can use Combine with any types of Swift. I don't know. I guess you can.
It really depends on how Swifty the API is for Combine. Like there are the things that come to mind, and I'm not a Combine expert. Swift structs can work in Objective-C until they start doing things that only Swift allows structs to do.
Right, and enums as well are much more powerful in Swift.
Yeah, it's basically going to boil down to if it's a structure in enum that can actually do operations of some sort, it's definitely not going to be interoperable with Objective-C, since those are expected to be just dumb data record holders.
I'm going to see if I can find the video that I saw
According to Apple documentation, quote, the Combine framework provides a declarative Swift API for processing values over time. Very explicit.
I think it was the Swift, what's the talk I'm looking at right now? Swift in Practice, I think, was the one I went to. Oh, Combine in Practice. Sorry, Combine in Practice, I think, was the one that I went to. Not the introduction to Combine one. Yeah, pretty sure that was the one I went to. And that's the one they talked about, sort of the different ways, Combine, how it works in general, and then how it works with Swift in general, and then they wrapped it up with how it works, how wonderful it works in SwiftUI. Alrighty. Part 2, this is again from Scott Gardner. He was supposed to talk at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and over time, that conference, he was really excited about it, but over time we found out that the conference was not going to be an in-person thing. But he continued to work on his talk, and his talk is basically on SwiftUI and Combine, and I believe it's called Combine All the Things. This link that I have here, I watched it the other day, went through the code. It's very straightforward. Interesting way of approaching a talk. He started with a UIKit application and converted it to use Combine, and sort of in this sort of model view model kind of thing that we've been talking about in the last couple of weeks as well. Also, it's a table view app, so there was using lists and using customized cells URLs as well, and how to basically use Combine to change. In his example app, he was going out to a URL, grabbing content grabbing gists from various authors on GitHub, and so the UIKit app did that. It had a sort of an Ajax-y kind of search thing that worked in there, but then showing how to do that in Combine, and quite good. The talk was supposed to be an hour, ended up being a little bit longer than an hour, but I think with pausing and whatever the video as you go through the code, you're not going to spend too much time on this particular talk, but yeah, it's very insightful walkthrough on how to use Swift with Combine. I learned a ton of things about using the two of them together, and I'll hand it over to Jaime.
The Try Swift series of conferences that are normally hosted in the United States, Japan, and India, maybe others, but those are the ones I can think of off the top of my head. Those aren't happening because of the pandemic, but what has happened is that this conference has gone online and is a little bit different. So Try Swift World is as it says on the tin here, a set of personal online workshops led by Swift developers around the world. Each workshop is limited to 10 attendees and lasts for about an hour with built-in time for networking, brainstorming discussions, etc. The current set of workshops, and there are 8 of them roughly, with folks you probably recognize like Erica Sadoun, Paul Hudson, and Daniel Steinberg, and others, are available for various topics like creating forms with Swift UI, or understanding key paths, getting your first steps in Combine. Wow, it looks like these are filling up since I added this link in the notes.
It's all on the waiting list, yeah.
Yeah, a bunch of waiting lists. A couple, as of this writing, are still available, but it says that they'll be, adding more over time. So
yeah, Sam Goodwin had mentioned he was going to do core data and Swift UI. I was looking forward to finding out what he was doing about that, but he just put out a teaser, and I see that his particular talk is sold out. Join the waiting list.
Yeah, and I'm a little confused because they show a list of instructors at the bottom that is a lot bigger than the number of workshops. So I wonder if they're still setting up more to come.
Hey, that guy Marin's on this list.
And there's a lot of names I recognize. Shai, David Oken,
Ellen Shapiro, Designated Nerd, Marcin Krasnowski, Shai Masali, lots of people. Oh, TDB, I know him too. And Mohammed Azam, he just did a talk on, or he just did a book on Model View Model with Swift UI as well recently. Available at your fine online bookstores, wherever those are. Cool. Is there like an actual these are workshops, right? But when is there a conference coming up? Do you know?
I think it's going to be a series of online workshops. So I think they changed how this was going to work. I'm not aware. Maybe they'll change their mind. Certainly there are other conferences that have decided to just become the same as they would be, except, hosted from your living room couch sort of thing. I don't know. So I'll definitely keep an eye out, see what they're saying on this website or on their Twitter account.
Interesting. Cool. All right. Well, I guess that's it for yet another week. So, hey, Jaime, if people want to get in touch with you, where would they find you?
I'm on Twitter as @DevWithAHair.
And Mark, if people want to get in touch with you?
Mark R at smapsoft.com.
All right. My name is Timitra, TIMMITRA on the Twitter machine is still the best way to get hold of me. So if you want to get, so until next time, we'll say bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
This has been another episode of the More Than Just Code podcast. If you want to find out more about the show, you can visit the More Than Just Code website at mtjc.fm. There you can find a summary and show notes of each episode. We list links to the apps, code, and news that we mentioned on the show. If you like the podcast, tell your friends. Please leave a comment on the website, and if you can, please write a review on iTunes. And please recommend us in your favorite podcatcher. All of these things help others find out about the show. We really appreciate your help with spreading the word. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd love to hear from you, so use the hashtag AskMTJC. Once again, the podcast Twitter account is @MTJC_podcast. Please consider supporting the show by pledging any amount on patreon.com/MTJC. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.
Do you guys still use Twitter as much as you used to?
Well, that depends. Are you talking about since I started working 9 to 5? I tend not to be on it all the time, like I might have been in the old days. But I'm on it probably. I think. Believe it or not, I'm probably on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn probably more often than I should be. Right, but Twitter a lot. I go to Twitter a lot to find things for the show and follow up on funny things and humor and stuff like that. Right. So
you two are the only people that I interact with regularly who use Twitter.
Really?
Often. Yeah.
I feel like
maybe other people do use it, but they don't talk about it all the time like you guys do.
we're integrated into the cyberverse, right? The metaverse, cyberspace, whatever we're calling, cool kids are calling it nowadays.
Well, I work with a lot of younger people. They do a lot of TikTok and stuff like that, I think.
So apparently they ran our, so we have our parliament. We have sessions in parliament, and there's like 300 members. And, they basically sit on opposite sides of the house. Well, actually, it's not quite it is set up like opposite sides of the house, but there's actually 3 or 4 parties, right? So, like the prime minister will sit on, the Liberals will sit on one side, and then the Conservatives and the NDP and, whatever, the Green Party will sit on the other side. And so, like, you have somebody at the front of the house who's the Speaker of the House, and he'll recognize such and such member from so and so, right? And then they'll get up and they'll start they'll talk to Mr. Speaker. They'll say, Mr. Speaker, blah 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 blah. I think that this should be done this way, blah blah blah. And all of his support, like everybody on his side, will sort of cheer him on and clap and whatever. And yet, at the same time, on the opposite side, all of the opposition members who disagree with this guy will just talk over him like the whole time. So it's like a big shouting match, really, right? I don't know if the U.S. is like that, but it's kind of comical sometimes, right? And I'm just imagining how the hell are they going to... They did it on Zoom this week, right? So they had a call the other day with and Carol said it was like a tile of small little faces, like 300 faces on this one Zoom call, right? And they're all, I can't imagine how they would do the yelling when we're top of each other, because I don't know if you noticed, but like when you're on Zoom and you have somebody talking and the other people won't want to just interject, they just start talking over top of each other and nobody can hear anything. I think it's funny to see Parliament kind of try to run that way, I should say, right? The opposition wanted everybody to come into Parliament 3 times a week and risk their lives and their loved ones, for the sake of this shouting match. All right. How's it going otherwise? Zoom challenges.
Yeah, it's all right, I guess. I mean, it's, constant wear and tear of being quarantined. Stuff just got to wait it out.
Yeah, it does weigh on you when you think about it sometimes, Like in some ways it's kind of like a vacation because you have to get up in the morning and commute. Well, mind you don't have to do that anyway, but you don't have to put pants on, Jaime. And is that your equivalent for you? And then, and it's just, but like, it's like, I was thinking today, I have not been any further than the block that I live on for the last, month and a half, right? Like, yeah, Carol's done all the shopping and she's, gone off to various places in the car and stuff like that. But I literally, as far as I can walk the dog in 15 minutes is the furthest I've gone, right? Is that like that for you, Mark, too?
Yeah, I've only left my house maybe 3 times in the past month. I typically go out to the supermarket 1 day a week. Yeah. And other than that, I pretty much don't leave the house. It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
I've gone a little further than you because the supermarket's further away, but
right.
But it's not, it's not more than a mile or 2 away. Yeah, it's kind of strange. It's kind of weird.
It's weird because like you can't watch any live stuff that isn't somehow related to the virus, right? Like, yeah, you can watch pre-recorded stuff like Netflix and anything, but there's no sports. There's nothing. If you removed all the COVID-19 related stuff, there's nothing going on in the world right now.
Wait, they're not showing the Flyers versus the Bruins from 1973 on all of your TVs?
Yeah, we do see that. And I think it was the Mavericks versus the Heat from 2006 for the NBA that they were showing this weekend because that's all they've got. But yeah, like there's no like escape for live stuff, and that feels weird.
Well, we went from like remember a couple of years ago, Rogers bought the rights to Hockey Night Canada, so they basically had and because they were partnering with CBC has a contract where they still have to show the Saturday night game. So you'd have Channel 6 would have a game, Channel 7 would have a game because it's owned by Rogers, and then we have 2 sports channels, the Sports Network and two channels that have that. So and then like these random channels would be showing it. So like you'd flip by on Saturday night and you could pick from 5 or 6 different games, right? We went from that to like now they're all showing like Gretzky and the LA Kings versus Patrick Waugh and the Montreal Canadiens from whenever, right? The 80 something, or all the sort of the top plays of the month. I thought that was comical. The other day I saw top plays of the month. There hasn't been a game played in a month, and here they put together this show, right? Are they showing old football games and stuff like that too?
On ESPN, I think. I think this weekend I remember seeing I don't know if it was like NFL playoffs greatest games or if it was like the marathon of Super Bowl recaps that they show from Super Bowl 1 to what are we on? 50, 54, 55?
Yeah. Speaking of which, have you seen that? There's a rugby sportscaster from the UK who's doing a couple of dogs at the dog park. Have you seen those tweets or YouTubes, TikToks?
I have not. And this is an actual announcer announcing a non-unknown sporting thing.
They're classic. It's like a couple of kids with a soccer ball in the park, or and he just randomly, and he does it with this real sort of sarcastic, over the top sports voice, right? And he throws in all the sort of sports analogies about this is the height of the game, and this is like, oh, here's that famous play that is only tried once in a while, and like totally over the top. I'll have to find.
Yeah, he does that for all sorts of stuff. I've seen
like pigeons in the park, and it's crazy. Yeah, I don't know if I'll find some links and during the show and post them to you.
It's wild. It's something that got kind of popular on sports Twitter was so Taiwan has been doing very well during the pandemic, and they have baseball is pretty popular over there. They had started streaming live. I don't know if it was on Twitter or if they were posting the link on Twitter. These games, and apparently it was popular enough that they had additional broadcasters on a separate channel or something that would do it in English, because the English-speaking world was desperate for sports and said, "Yep, I'm totally willing to stay up till 3 or 4 in the morning so I could start watching this baseball game for the Rakuten Monkeys and whoever the other team was that I couldn't remember."
Right. I found the guy's name. His name is Nick Heath, the sports fast. I'm going to paste this into Slack so you can watch it. It's pretty funny.
I mean, apparently New Zealand is doing pretty well, so I'm like, man, I'm going to start watching the All Blacks play on some rugby, because that's the closest I'm getting to football this year, it seems.
Really?
Well, they think they're going to play football this year. They seem to still think that.
Like NFL football?
NFL, yeah.
Yeah, I heard that they're going to do it without sports or without fans, right?
I thought that was baseball, wasn't it? Maybe football as well. I don't know.
Yeah. The whole point of it was to make money by, I guess, they can broadcast it, right?
Yeah, football, it's mostly TV.
Right.
Sales, yeah.
So they can advertise restaurants and services that you can't go to, right? So.
Well, that's true, yeah.
Baseball was talking about, MLB was saying, all right, well, they think they can do 3 10-team divisions split into West, Central, and East. And then they'd play in their home stadiums, but with no fans, was the latest sort of grasping at straws way to save the season, it seemed.
Oh, interesting.
So we'll see what happens. I remember seeing the divisions like, oh man, there's so many good teams in the Mariners division.
Oh, did they announce divisions?
No. This was just this has changed again, because they were going to do a completely different alignment just a couple of weeks ago. But I remember looking, it's like, oh man, all right, so we got like the Dodgers and somebody else ended up weird in the division. It was like, oh, are any of the divisions kind of weak? No, not really, because if you look at the West Coast, the East Coast, and the Central divisions area, it's like with 10 teams, you're going to have some heavy hitters no matter where you're at.
Well, if it's 10 teams in 3 divisions, that's still 30 teams. That's the same number of teams, right? They just rearranged the divisions, no?
I'm not sure how it worked out. I assumed that there were implications for the playoffs, and maybe a shortened playoffs of some sort. It wasn't really clear how that was going to work. But I know that the couple of weeks ago divisions, I was like, oh, so really it's only like the Royals and the Padres would have to worry about it, and we get rid of the Houston Astros. Like, oh, that's pretty good. That was a net positive for the Mariners. And this new division layout for temporary reasons was going to be worse.
I'm looking for some kind of link on that.